Somewhere in Austin, Texas, the sitting Vice President of the United States looked Joe Rogan dead in the eye and explained, calmly, like he was describing his commute, that aliens might actually be demons. And Joe Rogan, a guy who endorsed this administration, sitting across from one of its own, didn't laugh him out of the room. He also didn't really challenge him. He raised an eyebrow, floated one counterexample, and then mostly let Vance take the conversation wherever he wanted to take it. Here's what this video actually is. A close look at what it looks like when the second most powerful man in America brings his entire worldview into one of the most comfortable rooms in American media and basically gets to set the terms of the conversation himself. Because here's the part that actually got buried under all the VP believes in demons headlines. Vance walked in already knowing this topic was going to come up, and he leaned into it anyway. Plenty of people believe weird things. And the actually interesting question is why this particular belief sailed through the one interview where you'd almost expect a little friction and ran into almost none. Let's get into it. To understand why this conversation happened at all, you have to go back a few months to a much smaller podcast. J.D. Vance sat down with right-wing commentator Benny Johnson, and in the middle of a fairly normal political interview, casually dropped one of the strangest sentences a sitting vice president has ever said out loud. Asked about the so-called UFO files that President Trump had ordered declassified, Vance's answer, delivered completely straight-faced, was demons, not aliens.
All right, we're going to Area 51. We're going out to New Mexico. We're going to sort of get to the bottom of this. And then the timing of the trip just didn't work out. But trust me, anybody who's curious about this, I'm more curious than anybody. And I've got 3 years of the very, very tippy top of the classification. I'm going to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, so you haven't been to Area 51 yet?
Not yet.
Some
not
people
yet.
say they keep the UFOs in Ohio. You know, they might,
yeah, Hangar 18, Hangar 18, right?
I've
heard that as well. But I don't know. I haven't looked into it yet.
Okay. All right. Well, we're waiting for it. We saw aliens.gov.
You know me.
We saw aliens.gov.
I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons anyway, but that's a longer discussion.
That clip did what clips like that always do. It got ripped from context, turned into a 10-second loop, and passed around the internet with people basically summarizing it as the vice president thinks aliens are literally Satan. Here's the thing, though. Vance wasn't actually out on an island by himself. That same general window, Marjorie Taylor Greene went on Bill Maher's show and explained that as a Bible-believing Christian, she thinks UFOs could be fallen angels.
I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I definitely, and I believe those could be fallen angels.
All these things could be
fallen angels.
Yeah, fallen
The
angels.
aliens are fallen angels.
That's possible. I think that's what they could be. That's what makes sense in my worldview.
Barack Obama, years earlier, joked on camera that aliens are probably real somewhere in the universe, but said he personally saw no evidence of alien contact while in office.
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51.
Area 51. There's no underground facility, unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the President of the United States.
Trump ordered a wave of Pentagon UAP files released. There's now a documentary, The Age of Disclosure, built around interviews with a large group of former military and intelligence officials who claim decades of cover-up. So somewhere between 2020 and now, do you believe in aliens? Quietly stopped being a fun question you ask at a party and became an actual semi-normal thing elected officials get asked in interviews. Vance just happened to answer it with more theology than anyone was ready for. And most political gaffes get walked back fast. A staffer clarifies. The comment quietly disappears from future interviews. This one went the opposite direction. Vance kept talking about it in more detail, on a bigger stage, months later. Whatever you think of the theory itself, that's a specific kind of political confidence. The kind that either means you genuinely believe what you're saying, or you've decided the downside of saying something odd out loud is smaller than the downside of looking scripted, possibly both. And maybe it also helps that he already knew exactly which room he was walking back into. Which brings us to July 15th and the actual main event, Vance walks into the Joe Rogan Experience studio for a nearly 3-hour conversation that covers the 10 Commandments in schools, the Epstein files, voter ID, a UFC event that somehow happened on the White House lawn, and, eventually, aliens. Rogan doesn't let the demon comment go. He brings it up directly, reminding Vance exactly what he said, and asking him point blank to explain it.
You said something that I thought was very odd.
Okay.
You said that you thought that they were demons.
Okay, I did say that.
And then Vance does something kind of clever, honestly. He lays out what's basically a rigged multiple-choice test. When people describe an alien encounter, he says, there are only really a couple of explanations available. Either the person's lying, or they're talking to someone who's lost the plot, or, and this is the one he's actually interested in, there's genuinely something inhuman going on. And if that something is human-shaped, wildly powerful, and doing horrible experiments on people, he thinks there's real historical precedent for calling that a demon. He means it literally.
So if you look historically at, things that are similar to the alien phenomenon, where, some like strange being, it kind of looks like a human being, but doesn't look like, but it's not human. And it shows a particular interest in human beings. And then it takes the human beings and, does weird experiments on them. I think my argument is that's either bullshit, right? You're either talking to a crazy person, which I don't like. I'm not saying just because I believe in the supernatural doesn't mean I believe in everything supernatural. But if we're talking about an extraterrestrial being that is human-like but not human, that contains effectively infinite powers and is torturing human beings, you can call it an alien if you want, but I think there's a lot of historical precedent to call that a demon.
It's a neat little trap of a framework, honestly. Notice there's no fourth option in there. There's no box for we just don't know yet, and that's fine. One writer covering the episode joked that Rogan gave him 3 separate exits off that logic, and Vance calmly declined every single one of them. That's what happens when someone's turned an argument over in his head plenty of times before ever sitting down with Rogan. If Rogan were just there to nod along, the video would end right here. Instead, he goes and gets a counterexample, the Travis Walton case from 1975, where an Arizona logger claimed he was taken aboard a craft, and in his telling, the beings ultimately healed him and didn't just torture him. And Vance doesn't flinch. He just moves the goalposts to match. Torture, to him, sounds demonic. A being that heals people and talks to them telepathically? That, he says, sounds like an angel.
And that they had fixed him, they healed him, and then they had communicated with him telepathically, and he had had this very bizarre encounter with these beings that aren't from here. Or if they are from here, they're very different than us.
Okay, so I guess my response to that would be extra powerful beings, in this case communicating telepathically, helping people. Sounds like an angel.
Which is either a really slick piece of theological improv or the most honest thing anyone said in a political interview all year, depending on how charitable you're feeling. And that's it. That's the entire rebuttal. Nobody asks the obvious follow-up. If healing and telepathy get filed under angel and torture gets filed under demon, who's actually doing the filing? And what happens to every encounter that doesn't split so neatly? Rogan doesn't ask it. The conversation just moves on to the next thing. He keeps going. Vance frames himself as a believer first. He believes in God. He thinks there are things happening in the world we're not always seeing. And for basically all of human history, he argues, people who ran into something supernatural and hyper-powerful would have understood it in celestial terms rather than sci-fi terms. Spaceships and little green men, in his read, are a very recent way of packaging a very old experience.
Well, first of all, there not just in Christianity, but in a number of world religions, there are a number of mystical things that happened, extra dimensional, extra. Like I'm not one of these people who's like a hyper rationalist. Like I think that there are things happening in the world that we're not always seeing. I believe in God. I think that there is a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not extra real.
Supernatural.
Supernatural. There are supernatural things that are happening. Okay.
There's even a moment where Vance tries to explain why he doesn't think the label matters all that much in practice, using a comparison about how his own dog can't tell the difference between him and God. The point being, a being powerful enough might be functionally impossible to sort into angel, demon, or advanced alien from where we're standing.
My dog, there's no real difference between me and God to my dog. I can literally walk into a room and turn the light on. I can make food appear instantaneously. I can transport myself across time and space very, very rapidly. If you're a human being with intelligence, but not supernatural intelligence, I guess my point is, again, this could all be bullshit. This could all be fake. That's a possibility. But if it's real, is there really a meaningful difference between an angel or a demon and a space alien with super technology? To our perception, they would largely just look like the same things. And what I'm saying is the perception of those beings to a more simple intelligence,
Sure.
there's not a meaningful difference. So you're like talking about what it is that these things actually are. And I guess what I'm talking about is, how would a human being with my level of intelligence or your level of intelligence in 2026 understand what's going on?
Which is either a genuinely interesting point about the limits of human perception or the single weirdest sentence to come out of a sitting VP's mouth this year. It's got competition, but it's up there. And again, Rogan doesn't push on it. He just lets it sit there. At one point, even Vance seems to catch how strange the whole thing sounds out loud.
This is such a weird conversation.
Yeah. And Rogan laughs right along with him, like it's a fun tangent, not a moment that maybe deserved a harder question. Here's what I think a lot of the reaction videos get wrong, though, by treating this like some kind of Rogan versus Vance showdown. Rogan wasn't running a cross-examination. He was running the same, much gentler play he's run for 20 years, just with a much higher profile guest across the table this time. Go back and watch almost any Rogan episode about something unexplained, and the pattern's identical. He rarely challenges the claim directly. He offers his own alternative instead. When a guest showed up arguing that UFOs might actually be time-traveling future humans, descendants of ours coming back to study us, Rogan didn't push back on that one either. He pushed back. At one point, he even pulled out a 1975 UFO abduction case as a counterexample inside a nearly 3-hour conversation.
The Travis Walton story is a very famous case from the 1970s.
I don't know this one. I'm going to read about it on the way back, though.
It's this guy right here. I got a Travis Walton bobblehead. He's one of the most famous UFO abduction stories.
Okay.
When guests brought up the pyramids, same story. Rogan didn't ask for evidence behind the alternative theory. He just preferred it to the boring one.
They went to tremendous effort to remove imperfections from the stone, no cracks, almost like they didn't want the damn things to shake apart or vibrate.
Well, it's just the sheer scale of them. Like it flies in the face of logic. Like the actual archaeologists that want to lock this down and try to come up with some sort of a conventional reason and, some sort of an explanation that we can all get behind. Oh, they used pulleys and pushed them on logs. Like, shut the up. Yeah. Just shut the up. What you're saying doesn't even make any goddamn sense.
And when a whistleblower claimed the U.S. military had already reverse-engineered alien anti-gravity technology, Rogan didn't ask him to back it up either. He just said on record that it genuinely unsettled him.
They are ours, and their anti-gravity, that's just insane. And the part of me that's skeptical of it is because I know a lot about nuclear energy and nuclear power, and it took a huge amount of effort to build bombs. Huge amount of effort, huge number of people. So the idea that anti-gravity was then sort of like, oh yeah, we just did that in like a couple of years or something, that strikes me as really improbable.
Yeah, very improbable in a couple of years. But if they're doing it over decades, then they're doing it with retrieved crashes, which seems to be a part of the narrative.
Different guest, different decade, same exact shape of conversation every time, something impossible gets described, and instead of asking for proof, Rogan reaches for his own version of it. That's the actual through line, and it reframes the whole Vance moment. This isn't Rogan going easy specifically on the vice president. It's just how Rogan operates with almost anyone he finds interesting. Low friction, high curiosity, his own pet alternative always sitting right there instead of a real challenge. It happens to be extremely convenient if you're a politician who'd rather not get cross-examined on a claim like this, but it's not personal, it's just the format. So when I Think They're Demons rolled through the friendliest room in American media, it didn't survive some brutal Rogan gauntlet. It just never really had to. Now, if you want anything that actually resembles a rigorous challenge to any of this, you have to leave the show entirely. There's a professional scientist who weighed in too, and his response is worth knowing about. It's the closest thing this whole saga has to real pushback. Avi Loeb is a theoretical physicist at Harvard, and he runs something called the Galileo Project, a genuinely serious, funded effort to scientifically search for evidence of extraterrestrial technology. This is a guy whose entire career is built around taking the aliens might be real question seriously. So when he got asked directly about Vance's demon comment, his response was more measured than the setup suggests. Loeb said he doesn't actually see much conflict between Vance's religious framing and scientific inquiry in general, pointing out that even the Big Bang Theory has roots that echo much older religious ideas about creation, and that science and faith have been circling the same big unanswered question for a very long time. Where Loeb pushes back is narrower and honestly more interesting. He thinks jumping straight to demons, meaning specifically hostile, evil, malicious intent, is the part that goes too far without evidence. His actual position is closer to staying open-minded that we might not be the most advanced thing in this galaxy, full stop, no theology attached, good or evil optional. So the closest thing this whole saga has to a neutral referee looked at aliens are secretly evil supernatural beings, and basically said, sure, fine, stay curious, just don't assume they bite. Now, I do want to touch on the government secrecy angle here, because it came up in the same conversation. But I want to be upfront that this is Vance's own stated opinion. On the record, same as the demon stuff, and none of it independently confirmed. Elsewhere in that same 3-hour sit-down, Vance was actually asked point blank whether the U.S. government is sitting on actual alien remains somewhere, and his skepticism was really about government competence. He doesn't think anyone could keep a secret that size under wraps for years without it leaking.
I made this point to Dave when we talked. It's like, if we have literal space alien remains in the custody of the United States government, there is no way that wouldn't leak out in some way.
Which is a genuinely funny thing to say back to back with a segment where Vance also acknowledged in that same episode that his administration's handling of the Epstein files has been heavily criticized. So, in one conversation, you've got the vice president simultaneously trusting his read on ancient scripture enough to redefine what a UFO is, while openly distrusting his own government's ability to keep literally anything under wraps. Pick a lane. To be fair, it's not that Rogan agreed with everything Vance said in this episode. When the conversation turned to displaying the 10 Commandments in public schools, Rogan pushed back directly, and Vance defended it as part of the country's cultural heritage rather than a religious mandate.
Putting the 10 Commandments in schools, I don't think is the right way to do it. And this is a guy, Tallarico, who was in seminary and is very Christian. Mm-hmm. He just thinks that even though he believes in the 10 Commandments, if you're just only representing the Christian faith in these schools, you're forcing your religion into other people's lives, and that this is going to push people away from Christianity rather than encourage them to pursue it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you never want to force things on people. And I think one of the core Christian contributions to Western civilization is the idea of freedom of religion. It's actually very much a Christian idea because you recognize the dignity of each individual. And part of recognizing that dignity is that each person has to find their own pathway to God. You can't force this on anybody. I don't think putting the 10 Commandments up in school is like forcing things on any. This is like an important cultural element of the Western civilization, which is the foundation of the classroom that I'm sitting in. And this idea that the law comes and is sort of above any man, even if you don't believe in God yourself, I think that's like an important concept. I mean, if you look at the 10 Commandments, probably 8 of them are something that I would hope that everybody would agree with, even if they're not themselves religious.
So there's real on-camera disagreement in this interview. It just didn't show up anywhere near the demon stuff. Zoom out far enough, and the demons conversation is really just one data point in a much bigger trend. UFOs have quietly become bipartisan political content. You've got the Pentagon releasing multiple batches of declassified UAP paperwork since earlier this year. You've got a documentary built around former officials claiming a long-running cover-up. You've got a former president, a sitting vice president, and a former congresswoman all publicly weighing in with completely different frameworks. Scientific curiosity, literal demonology, cautious who knows agnosticism, and none of them getting laughed out of the room for it. Whatever you personally think is actually flying around up there, the fact that this is now a normal thing politicians get asked about on the record on the biggest podcast in the world is the real story here. The demons line is just the most quotable part of it. All right, here's my actual take on all this for what it's worth. And you're free to disagree with me in the comments. I'll survive. I don't think this was a tough interview, and I don't think it was ever supposed to be one. Rogan raised the obvious question, got a smooth, prepared-sounding answer, and let it go. No follow-up on the inconsistency, no real pressure test. That's not really about Vance specifically. It's just what a Rogan episode looks like when he's comfortable with the guest, which he clearly was here. Whether that's a problem depends on what you think this show is even for. Some people think long-form podcasts were never supposed to be journalism, and holding Rogan to an interrogation standard misses the whole appeal of the format. It's supposed to feel like two guys talking, not a deposition. Other people think that when the guest is a sitting vice president making a genuinely unusual theological claim, the bar should be a little higher than, interesting, given how much reach a show like this actually has. Separately, there's the question of whether this was smart politics for Vance, and that Reed is just as split. Some commentators, including people generally in his corner like Ben Shapiro, who put out a non-glowing review of the episode and questioned the focus on demonology, think spending a big memeable chunk of a 3-hour interview on demons theology, while the actually consequential stuff on foreign policy, and Epstein got buried under the alien headline, is a real unforced error for a guy widely assumed to be laying groundwork for 2028. Other people think that's exactly backwards, that Vance saying odd, unfiltered things on the record, in a room where nobody's going to press him hard on it, is precisely what makes him watchable in the first place. But on the interview itself, there's not much to debate. Nothing here really got tested. And that, more than the theology, might be the actual story. Either way, it made a great clip. What you just watched was Joe Rogan doing the exact same thing he does with almost every guest he's comfortable with, getting curious instead of critical. Except this time, the guy across the table was a heartbeat away from the presidency. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we actually go back to the source, instead of just reacting to a 10-second clip, subscribe and let me know down in the comments. Demons, angels, or just some really advanced guys? I'll see you in the next one.